Hello and welcome to Artist Express. Today our guest is Steve Hoffman, an artist who lives and works here in Salina. Steve, why don't we begin by having you tell us a little bit about the kind of work you do?
Mostly it's sculptural. I call my stuff tabletop sculpture. It's usually no more than 1.5 feet, 2 feet tall. It's mixed media, wood, metal, plastic, bits and pieces from my scrap buckets. I have made some large pieces, but generally I don't work large anymore. At least I probably won't for a while, because every time I do, my wife's car has to live outside because I have to use the garage to build those big projects.
And this is not a good time of year to have your car outside
Right,
the garage
yes.
if you don't have to. Absolutely. Well, talk about your scrap buckets. How do you fill those up? Where do you gather things that you incorporate into your sculptures?
Well, I'm interested in parts, the things that are hidden inside of appliances and behind the walls, industrial materials, and so I actually went through a phase where I would buy a lot of small appliances from the thrift store, tear them apart, and then I would collect the gears and the motors and the cables, and all those things are potential elements for a small sculpture.
And have you been surprised sometimes at the shapes you find or the forms?
Yeah. A lot of the parts they have to be symmetrical. If they're gears, shafts, if they're driving a motor, they have to be made with some precision, and they have to be finished smoothly, and they're almost always works of art in themselves.
Ah, I see. That sounds very interesting. Now, when I first met you, and I still can't recall, it was probably 20 years or more ago, but you were working on a large installation for preschool children. Can you talk a little bit about that? I happened to be in that building last year, and your work is still in operation there. The children love it.
That's great. I am glad to hear that. I used to work at Heartland Programs, which is the local Head Start service, and I came up with an idea called the Learning Path, which is installed on the walls at kid height as the kids move from bus to classroom to outside, back and forth. The teachers like to give them something to do while they're in line. And I thought, well, this is a teaching moment, and we're losing this time. So I devised the idea of mounting panels that the staff and parents made, and the panels they'd feature numbers and letters and textures and concepts like big and small, colors, and these things would all be mounted on the wall. Kids can look at them, they can touch them. They're kid-proof. They're made to be touched, and they're made to be taken off the wall, swapped around as new ones are made. Sometimes they move from one hallway to another, give all the classrooms a chance to see them. So I am ecstatic to hear that it's still being used.
Yes,
that is
all
great.
those little hands touching those through the years, and they have maintained them and so that the kids can continue to use them.
Excellent.
I think that's great.
I love that.
Now, that makes me think of another question I had for you. You're talking about teaching concepts with those pieces. In general, would you say your artwork is more about concepts or ideas, or would you say it's about an object for observation? Does it stand alone as simply something to look at?
I know that I have made things that I thought were decorative, but in general, I'm not a decorative artist. I like to ask a question or or explore an idea with a piece. And that sounds terribly pretentious and philosophical. I can't give it that much credence. But I do like to think, well, for instance, I made a welded blue heron sculpture a couple of months ago. And it's just an outline. You can imagine drawing a line in the air. It's an outline of the bird. And then inside the bird, where his stomach would be, there's an outline of a fish. And inside the fish, there is a worm. And so my idea was, well, sure, herons eat fish. That's what I think of when I think of a heron. I think of a heron snatching a fish out of the water. But what's the fish eat? Yeah. And so that piece, as interesting to look at as I thought it was really kind of a joke. And the punchline is the worm inside the fish, inside the bird.
So what did you decide on for a title?
Blue Heron.
Oh, you didn't carry the joke on. Okay.
I painted it blue. Yeah.
That's great. Now, I happen to know that you're working on a show that will feature birds in general, am I right? That will be coming up soon.
Yes.
Will this be part of that?
No. No, I've been experimenting with ceramics. In fact, I've taught myself ceramics the last couple of months, and I've been making ceramic birds. It's just a basic form. It's a little body, a stubby tail, and a long neck. And once I take that piece out of the plaster mold, then I twist it, and I cut it, and I carve it, and I do all kinds of things to change it.
Right.
It's still the basic body shape, but now it's got something interesting happening at the head or the tail end. And I'm making a flock of birds. I hope I will have 25 or 30 of them.
Wow.
By the time March rolls around. In March, I'll have a show at the Flower Nook.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, very good.
So I hope that those birds will be available for everyone.
I hope they will too. I'm looking forward to seeing them. Now, when did you discover that you enjoyed making? Were you a child? Did you have some experience in your school years that helped you make that discovery? What happened to get you started down this road?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Sometime in my college years, I think, or in high school, I started designing my own magazines. I imagined what would my magazine look like if I published one. What would my perfect house look like? And I would draw plans for the house. And I think in college I began making small objects just because I thought that maybe a death ray cannon would be interesting to have in my apartment. So I would make one out of cardboard.
That's great.
Imagining, gee, if I had the skills, I could really make this out of metal and plastic, and it would look like a real cannon, but I had to settle for cardboard.
But that's fine.
Yeah.
You still got the fun of inventing.
Yes, it's that doing that is important, because I think a lot about my projects. I build them in my head over and over again.
Yes.
But it's not until you start putting the pieces together and cutting things out and realizing that you have to take a little different turn along the way.
Yes.
That's where the real creation happens, I think.
And the challenge.
Yeah.
If something doesn't work, figuring out what will.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Have you ever had a goof up that really taught you a good lesson that you were able to use afterwards?
Yeah. I'll tell you, I hate it when I can't make the pictures that are in my head. I hate compromising that vision of what the piece should look like. But too many times I've had to do that.
Right.
Yeah.
revise along the way,
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. I could do it just the way I wanted to if I had a certain technique, or
Yes.
if I had a certain machine.
So making is a lot about continuing to learn
Yeah.
as well. Now, I know that you have lived in Salina a good long while, and you're well acquainted with others in the community, other artists. Can you talk a little bit about any collaborations you've had with other artists?
Sure. For a long time, I was just on the periphery of the art community. It hasn't been until the last year and a half or 2 years that I really started getting involved with the local art scene. I don't know a lot of artists, but I did engage two fellows who became my friends, Rick Frisbee and Kerry Brinegar. We worked on a river festival project, which was featured for 3 years at the river festival. It was enormous. It was 12 or 14 feet wide and 8 feet high, and it probably weighed a ton. And it took about 4 people to dismantle it and move it into storage, and take it out of storage, bring it over to the park, and assemble it again.
Was it made of metal?
There was a metal skeleton. It had a skin of plywood.
Oh, plywood's
there were
heavy.
two towers on the ends, and then mounted between the towers were these long boxes, and the boxes had sections of paintings that Carrie and Rick and I did. And you could spin these boxes around and mix and match. You could make your own painting from the 3 different designs that were represented there.
Yes, I remember that piece very well. I enjoyed it a lot. That was fun to see.
That was the big picture. I learned so much from that. I designed and built the whole thing from scratch.
Wow.
And I learned so much from that project. But again, that was an enormous project, and my wife's car had to live outside. And toward the end of the project, it took up the whole back patio. And you know, it's funny, as big as it was, I mean, it took up the whole patio. When you move it to the park,
Yes.
it's tiny. It's just
Exactly.
tiny.
I've learned that lesson myself many years ago when I did a banner that was 12 feet by 3 feet, and it sounded like such a big deal. And in my living room it was. But when it hung on the side of the building, like you said, it was a little flag.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, how does your creativity manifest itself in non-arts activities when you are working around the house or at your day job or whatever? Do you find that it affects the way you think about other problem solving you have to do?
I think that's a chicken and egg question, because, well, for instance, frequently when I'm doing the dishes, I always reach for the dish towel, which is hanging on the handle of the oven. And I think, boy, you know, there's got to be a better way to store this towel. And I think every time I do the dishes, I think of 100 different ways, 100 new products that I could invent to hang this towel right there.
Right, and then you'd have to go through the whole patenting process and marketing and finding all that business type stuff to do. So, is that a deterrent?
No, it's not. But on the other hand, I think that my art experience allows me to see 100 different solutions to that problem.
And you have that much fun.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Steve, our time is up. Remember, everyone, you can see Steve's Flock of Birds at the Flower Nook in March. And no telling what else will be coming up soon. Thank you for being here, Steve.
You're welcome. Thank you.